It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast, the show that is so nice. We do it twice here. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman at Ross Tucker NFL. You can check us out at Ross Tucker Pod on all the various socials. I actually really appreciate those of you that do. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. Love my co-host for the Fantasy Feast Podcast, John Daigle from EstablishTheRun.com. Can't highly recommend enough that you use the code FEAST to get that discount on all of their wealth of information. We did 7 games, John, in episode 1. Check him out, by the way, at NotJDaigle on social media, which means we've got 8 to get to. Cowboys and Bears are on buys this week. So we'll start with the juicy one, Lions and the Vikings.
What a fun matchup. An undefeated team coming off their bye, hosting the other, what we believe is the major competitor to be aware of, not only in the division, but the conference, in the Lions. And although the Vikings defense has stunted everyone this year, and they've played some tough quarterbacks, C.J. Stroud included, the Lions last year produced 30 points under Ben Johnson in both of their games against Minnesota. Jared Goff in those contests last year against Brian Flores, 73.4% completion rate, 3 touchdowns, 0 picks. Again, I think we're in for a really fun one here. And I would love to tell you, I know where the targets are going to be dispersed for Detroit, but what they've really unlocked this season is getting everyone involved. Sam Laporta gets there for us last week on a design play to him, but it was still just 1 target, 1 catch, and a 50-yard touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown, I know, is also frustrating his fantasy managers, but still involved. Like week 1, whenever we thought he failed, it was actually just a 21.5% target share, and he was just fine. So, again, the Vikings don't really funnel anywhere necessarily. They've just been a tough defense overall. But I think the point is to have confidence in them and continue to start Jameson Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta, Dave Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs. They have not failed you yet, and I expect a high-scoring one here. And I expect a high-scoring one, I think, because of the loss, unfortunately, of Aiden Hutchinson. Was on a tear to be Defensive Player of the Year, and now out for the season, unfortunately. The Lions will continue to look elsewhere for answers, but if we believe that Sam Darnold is just going to be operating from a clean pocket, it's worth noting that he's averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, the second best number in the league when he hasn't been under pressure this year. He's been incredible. And so I believe that just how the way you attack this Lions defense and that you have to get it done through the air, because only 2 running backs over their last 25 games. Again, that's a stretch dating all the way back to last year. 2 running backs, Christian McCaffrey in the playoffs and Kenneth Walker on Monday Night Football earlier this year, have rushed for over 70 yards against the Lions. They've just been stout consistently in their front 7. Aaron Jones also went into the bye with a hip injury. We don't know if it's going to be Ty Chandler starting, and he will be in every touchback. So I'm playing him in fantasy as an RB2 if Jones is out. But it's just such a tough matchup that we have to lean on Darnold, Justin Jefferson, and then the sneakier option, because he didn't pop in the box score, Jordan Addison. But quietly, before the bye, Addison went into there with a 28.5% target share in his last game. I think the targets are really starting to become dispersed between Jefferson and Addison in particular. So I love getting Addison in there into our fantasy lineups this week.
Let's talk about anything. Did I miss anything? Oh, you said Laporta. All right. How about Giants and Eagles?
For the Eagles, everyone back at full strength. And I know, Ross, yourself included, the coaching decisions are frustrating. There's a lot of odd things happening within that coaching staff and decision-making right now in Philadelphia. But at least for fantasy, it remains condensed in any game that A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are out there. Dallas Goedert did suffer an injury, but even then, they just brought Grant Calcaterra off the bench, and he played an every down role, the same one that Goddard would have played had he been healthy. And right now we've seen in the only 2 games, A.J. Brown has finished 10 and 9 targets. Absolutely dominating with over 100 yards in both of those performances. Devonta Smith also just dominating targets from the power slot role as the team's number 2 wide receiver. Also a little bit of something to note because no one's ever going to bench Saquon Barkley. He's going to be fine. He's still been explosive. The Giants are a team that, as they showed even against Chase Brown on Monday night, they leak a top 5 rate of 10-yard runs to opposing running backs. Barkley's going to get there. But I do think it's worth noting that in the 2 games A.J. Brown has played, his target share has been cut completely in half. 7.5% compared to 14% in 3 games without A.J. Brown. It's as if those targets instead get dispersed to wide receivers. But again, at least we know exactly where the ball goes in Philadelphia when all are healthy. On the other side of the ball, it's a little more complicated because we are waiting out the news of Malik Neighbors and concussion protocol. We've seen the last 2 weeks, Darius Slayton has totaled 22 targets without Neighbors available. Someone you definitely want to start in fantasy against this Eagles secondary. Even though rookie Kenyon Mitchell is playing lights out, they've been leaking big plays elsewhere in that back end. So Slayton is someone we definitely want to play if Neighbors is once again out. And then we will wait and see on Devin Singletary because the rookie, Tyrone Tracy, has not only out-touched Eric Gray 41-4 since Gray first fumbled on the opening drive of week 5 the last 2 weeks, but Tracy's been so good that I don't know how they send him back to the bench despite Devin Singletary doing nothing wrong. I think we're headed for another 60-40 timeshare, which I know fantasy managers hate because it's happening everywhere in the league right now, but I think we're headed for a timeshare between Singletary and Tracy moving forward. So even if Singletary were not to play, Tracy's not someone you want to drop. You just want to hold, potentially flex against this Eagles front 7, and then let's see how the touches work themselves out.
Love it. That's interesting to know about Tracy, the former receiver who just moved to running back. What about the Raiders and the Rams, John?
For the Rams, Matthew Stafford, it may surprise people to hear, he hasn't finished as a top 12 quarterback in any game this year. In fact, his last 4 performances for fantasy, he's been outside the top 20, like barely playable in Superflex leagues too. But against the Raiders, we know to start everyone. Even the last 2 weeks, Bo Nix finishes the QB8, Justin Fields the QB7. And so I think Matthew Stafford will finally have at least a fringe QB1 performance to jam him in to those Superflex leagues wherever you have that option. We're also coming at the bye, maybe with Cooper Kupp, maybe not. Perhaps it's Jordan Whittington instead who is playing that slot role. But we've seen now Tutu Atwell, working in 2 wide sets without Puka Nacua, has finished as a top 36 receiver in all 3 games before the bye. Tutu Atwell is someone we're starting, especially in this matchup, but let's keep on the lookout also for that explosive rookie Jordan Whittington, who's been hammered targets from the slot in each of the last 2 games. It's also interesting for 12 and 14 leagues if everyone wants to stash Blake Corum, because Corum, the rookie, had not been trusted over Ronnie Rivers until Los Angeles game before the bye. And only then did he finally get over 5 touches, averaged 5.5 yards per carry. So maybe out of their bye, they could be looking at a few more touches for Corum behind Kyron Williams, just something to keep in mind. For the Raiders, it gets a little more interesting because we're taking Devontae Adams out of the lineup. I know he hasn't played with a quote-unquote hamstring injury the last 2 weeks, but we've also seen their target share condensed without Adams in the lineup. In his last 2 games played, and it sounds like he's going to return from this one, remember, Jacoby Myers had 19 targets. And then in Brock Bowers' last 2 games played, one without Myers, he's seen 22 targets. Those are the options to clearly prioritize wherever you can. Jacoby Myers, I know, was dropped in a lot of places on waiver wires just because we thought Adams could be coming back. And if that's the case, you have to go pick him up, especially for this one because the Rams have allowed the 7th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. I know it's Aiden O'Connell, but I think the Raiders' passing game can actually get it done in this job and elevate both Myers and Bowers.
Love it. I am very much looking forward to the next matchup from a fantasy perspective, at least. Carolina and Washington. Carolina's defense, John, is bad. I mean, they are bad.
Very bad. So much so that I won't even give you the RB1 stats against them. I'll give you the backup running back stats against them. And just look at this. Tyler Algier last week, 105 yards and a touchdown. Roschon Johnson, the Bears backup, 25 yards and 2 touchdowns. Chase Brown, who was operating behind Zach Moss, 80 yards and 2 touchdowns. Gus Edwards had 18 carries for 59 yards. And then go all the way back to week 1 when Jamal Williams had 38 yards and a touchdown as well. It's so bad. And honestly, I don't know how it happens, but they lose an important player every single week in their front 7 too. It's so bad that if Brian Robinson were to miss this game, that not only does Austin Eckler become a top 12 option, fringe top 12 option, but I also think backup Jeremy McNichols is a player worth starting and flexing in week 7 because of all the reasons I just mentioned with opposing rushing attacks absolutely dominating Carolina's front 7. A Panthers defense that's permitting nearly 6 more points per game to opposing running backs, 29.5, than the next closest team. Jane Daniels will be fine, still finishes the QB9 last week in what was his worst game. But I think it was still like the most encouraging performance ever for a losing performance because he was still asked to do everything as a pocket passer. We'll get to that Ravens defense later on in this episode. But even as a pocket passer, again, the QB9 against Baltimore had some rookie mistakes, sure, but also some amazing throws, including that toe-tapping touchdown in the back of the end zone to Terry McLaurin. Everyone knows you just start everyone against the Commanders or against the Panthers. But what I think makes this game most I expect the Panthers to push back as well because Dalton has now thrown for multiple touchdowns as a top 24 quarterback in each of his 3 starts around his game against the Chicago secondary, which no one performs well against. Not only that, but I think because the Commanders secondary struggled through so much in those first 3 games, especially against the pass, Dan Quinn has pretty much changed up the way he's scheming the offense. They've played the second highest rate of man coverage the last 3 games. And Dalton against man coverage this year, a league high 73.5% completion rate and the second most yards per attempt. We know he loves going to Deontay Johnson and the first-round rookie Xavier Legette. Legette, who outside of week 5 when he suffered his shoulder injury, has otherwise finished as the wide receiver 13 and wide receiver 33 in place of Adam Thielen. So I think everyone gets there in this game, and it's one of the most fun ones for fantasy of the weekend.
Love it. Sounds like if you got any guys in that Panthers-Commanders game, you'll be celebrating. Drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends and live life to the power of we. That's how I celebrate. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Next game up, John. Chiefs-Niners, Super Bowl rematch. How about it?
A Super Bowl rematch, and we only have 2 instances of Brock Purdy against Chiefs DC Steve Spagnuolo, including like one off-the-bench performance for Jimmy Garoppolo in his rookie year. But Spagnuolo has still had Purdy's number in those games. 57.5% completion rate, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. And it's not only that, it's that the 49ers have to get it done through the air because of what this Chiefs defense is doing on the ground. They already halted the big dog himself, Derrick Henry, to 46 yards and a touchdown. Bijan, they stuffed him for 31 yards and a touchdown. Alvin Kamara as well, just a couple of weeks ago on Monday night, 11 carries for 26 yards. No one gets the best of Spagnuolo's front 7. And so even if Jordan Mason plays, I'm worried about the 49ers running backs. Having said that, we at least saw with Jordan Mason out of the game in the second half last week, it was the explosive rookie, Isaac Guerendo, who literally profiled as a top 5 most athletic back at the combine in the last 2 decades. He came off the bench, out-touched Patrick Taylor 10-6, and would have gone for over 100 yards and a touchdown on only 10 carries. He's so explosive. If it were not for him being a team player and slowing down on his 76-yard run to take a slide before he got tackled. So, love Guerendo despite the really tough on-paper matchup. If he were to play, it's a situation we're just trusting Shanahan to scheme it up for their running backs, since even against a tough Jets defense, we know in week 1, Jordan Mason exploded for 147 yards and a touchdown. We also saw the recalibration last week of the target share between Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. I would not look at last year's performance in the Super Bowl for Brandon Ayuk and how poorly he fared in that game, because remember, no more L'Jarius Sneed for the secondary, so they are not as airtight, shutting down wide receivers from outside. Do not be scared to play Brandon Ayuk in this matchup. For the Chiefs side of the ball, it's also become more condensed without Rashee Rice. An interesting spot, because you wouldn't know this, Ross. This is shocking. But Patrick Mahomes has not been a top 12 quarterback for fantasy in 10 consecutive games, going back to last year, just because of how they engineer their offense as a lot of shallow passes and just being more efficient than explosive. And that continues to be the theme heading into this game without Rashee Rice, because at least we've seen it all now condense. Kareem Hunt, a dominant 28 touches, will absolutely be the leading back with 25-plus touches in this game. Travis Kelce, without Rashee Rice the last 2 weeks, 32% and 29% target shares, because they can't take him off the field. He has no more time to just rest in regular season games. They need everyone available right now. And not only that, but Juju Smith-Schuster also popping up for over 100 yards and a 23.5% target share behind Travis Kelce before the Chiefs went on bye. I will say, I'm not as high on Juju Smith-Schuster as a lot of other people. I know they have decisions on their waiver wire like Christian Watson, Demario Douglas, or Juju, and I prefer those first two compared to Juju, if only because I'm trying to keep a level head with the situation and not just overreact to a 100-yard performance in prime time and say, like, okay, in that game against the Saints, the Chiefs ran 80 plays. They're not going to do that again. And also, it was Juju Smith-Schuster's most receiving yards, 130, since December 2018. Also, we have to scale that back. And remember, the Saints also allow the 8th most fantasy points to opposing slot wide receivers. So it kind of just all really worked out for Juju in that game. I still think he's a wide receiver 3, but I just want everyone to temper their expectations a hair.
Let's get to the game I'll be in the booth for. Really looking forward to it. And the Steelers. Now, reminder, we record this show on Wednesday. This is episode 2 of the show that's so nice we do it twice. So that drops shortly after midnight on Thursdays. It does look like Davante Adams will play, John. And as for the Steelers, on the other side, I think it'll be Justin Fields, but there's a lot of rumors about Russell Wilson. That would just stun me, man. I mean, they're talking about a new quarterback in Pittsburgh, but I'll believe it when I see it.
And it's also frustrating to break down this game because obviously Justin Fields and Russell Wilson play a completely different style. I personally, like you, I don't think Fields has done anything to get benched. It'd be really confusing. But whenever the smoke already starts blowing that way, typically in NFL, that's how these things go. That means it's much more than rumors. It's something that has been talked about behind the scenes. So we'll see what happens. I will say at least what we know for the Steelers offense is that George Pickens, after even being called out by the coaching staff for lazily going through his routes a couple weeks ago, did get right back to being an every down player, a team high 8 targets as well. And the way Russell Wilson, how he operates and throws the ball, like Cortland Sutton last year, where he just targets receivers deep, he attempts to throw in a bucket, it still works out well for George Pickens, who creates his own separation. So if anyone has questions for fantasy about how does this affect Pickens going from Fields to Russ potentially, I would not worry so much. I am worried, and I think it's a sell high for Najee Harris, because now we've seen Jaylen Warren available for only 2 full games all year. And Najee Harris has handled less than 60% of Pittsburgh's backfield touches and a timeshare, essentially, in both of those 2 games. I know we reached over 100 yards for the first time all year last week against the Raiders, but one, go back and watch that tackling. It was not the greatest effort from the Raiders defense, who I know is injured. And then 2, since it does continue to be a timeshare, I think we should take that performance and sell him in fantasy leagues instead. Definitely worried about Najee Harris moving forward despite that ceiling game. But no one came here to talk about the Steelers. Everyone wants to talk about Davante Adams and the Jets, and it is a good spot. We saw Davante Adams, at least in his last 2 years in Green Bay, the wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 6 in fantasy points per game from Aaron Rodgers. It's unfortunate for Garrett Wilson because Wilson has now seen at least 8 targets in 4 consecutive games, including double-digit numbers in back-to-back weeks. But we even had established the run. We just had to jam down his target share because we know how this is going to go. We know Rodgers and Adams have an elite rapport that is arguably the best in the league between any quarterback and receiver combo. And so we jammed down Garrett Wilson to a 24% target share the rest of the year. Still a wide receiver, fringe wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 2, rest of season. But Davante Adams immediately in week 1. Think back to the first episode where I said, I believe Amari Cooper because he doesn't know the playbook, is only going to play half the snaps. Davante Adams knows Nathaniel Hackett's playbook from Green Bay, and he obviously knows Aaron Rodgers from all the years working together. So I think Davante Adams is a top 12 wide receiver immediately beginning this week against the Steelers.
I love football. I love tailgating. I love that you guys get to tailgate a lot more than I do with Smirnoff, the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. It's an experience that is best enjoyed together. How about this? Smirnoff is giving fans in select areas of the country a chance to win the ultimate game day experience. Tickets, sideline passes, much more. Head to WeDoGameDays.com until November 15th. WeDoGameDays.com. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. No purchase necessary. 21 plus. Ends 11/15/24. See rules at website for participating area and other important details. Sponsored by Diageo Americas Incorporated, New York, New York. I'll be very careful. I can't wait. Perfect timing for me to be in the booth for that one. Let's talk another one I'm excited about. Ravens Bucks. Bunch of points could be there too, John.
Bunch of points. I agree with you because, get this, only 2 quarterbacks this year have 4 top 5 finishes for fantasy. Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield. Baker has been a top 7 quarterback in every game except for that poor performance against the Broncos, which, as we talk about weekly, no one gets there against. So for Baker and the passing offense, I am very excited. It's not only that, but the Ravens defense is one that funnels you through the air too. So I think we're just going to get a nuclear game for Baker, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin's, and Cade Otton. Because think about it. Against the Ravens defense, all the running backs they've played so far, and remember, they've also played Jaden Daniels and Josh Allen this year. No one has reached 50 rushing yards against them. Not a single time this season. You have to beat Baltimore through the air. And that's something that Baker and that passing offense has shown they're capable of doing. So everyone I know for fantasy, we saw Sean Tucker look great, by the way, in place of Rachaad White in a committee with Bucky Irving. The issue, though, again, is that no one gets there against the Ravens front 7. So I would definitely be skeptical of starting Sean Tucker this week, even if Rachaad White is out again. On the other side of the ball for the Ravens, it's also a secondary that we know we can attack. Spencer Rattler even checking in with a top 24 performance in his first career start last week. And we also know where Lamar Jackson wants to go to the ball because outside of that week 4 performance where they beat down Buffalo, the Ravens did, and they only threw 18 pass attempts, Zay Flowers 2 targets in that game. Around that 2-target game, he has not dipped below a 25% target share in any contest, including last week, 36% of Lamar Jackson's targets. That's where Jackson wants to go every single game. And so, although Mark Andrews does pop up as a streamer because we can stream Andrews any week that we think the Ravens are going to be forced to pass the ball, or at least have success doing so, we can go back to Andrews, but I will note for everyone that Isaiah Likely has actually ran more routes than Andrews in 4 consecutive games. So, likely Andrews fine in this game, but Zay Flowers is where we really go alongside Derrick Henry.
Okay, and then what about last but not least? I don't even know. Oh, it's ESPN Plus only. Chargers, Cardinals.
ESPN Plus only, so tune into there for this one if you would like to. Let's start with the Cardinals side of the ball because one of the most frequent comments I get, honestly, especially when it comes to the waiver wire, is what to do with Kyler Murray because his managers are very frustrated with how drastically inconsistent he's been. He does have 3 top 12 finishes, including 2 top 5 performances this year. But in his other 3 starts, the QB 18, the QB 24, and QB 21, not what you signed up for, I know, if you drafted him as a top 6, top 7 option. But I will say, at least in this particular spot, the Chargers dealing with injuries. Not only that, but Bo Nix's game from Sunday gives us some encouraging performance for Murray. 61 rushing yards for Nix as the QB 10. So I still think Murray can get there, even if Marvin Harrison Jr. does not play. He will have an extra 24 hours since his game is on Monday night to clear the concussion protocol. But in his last 3 games and a quarter and a half, including last week, that he's shared the field with Michael Wilson, it's actually been Michael Wilson has only seen 3 fewer targets than Marvin Harrison Jr. in that time. And that's why Harrison's really struggling to reach his ceiling for fantasy, because Wilson has been earning target as a good second-year receiver. And so if everyone has that issue where they don't have Marvin Harrison Jr. this week, definitely go pick up Michael Wilson as the pivot. On the other side of the ball, I don't know whether the Chargers wanted to come out from their bye with this particular game plan, or if it's just because Pat Surtain suffered his concussion on the very first play of the game, and then it swapped Jim Harbaugh's thinking. But it was the most raw pass attempts for the Chargers, 34, and Justin Herbert, despite them leading 20-0 at the half and 23-0 in the third quarter. There may be a little bit of trying to uptick the passing volume for this offense that had instead been run heavy before their bye. And if that's the case, we should note then the Cardinals struggled to get pressure, 28th in pressure rate this year, and Justin Herbert has averaged 8.5 yards per attempt from a clean pocket, 7th best among all quarterbacks. So everyone's going to play J.K. Dobbins, I know, but I think Ladd McConkey, Justin Herbert, Quentin Johnston, if he plays, I think that's the sneaky way to approach this game on DraftKings one-game slates too.
I love it. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.